Why do Americans seem less willing to support social programs than other Western cultures? The most obvious answer probably relates to the U.S. status as a political outlier, since we are the only federalist presidential system in the developed world. This fact allows both certain attitudes on policy to live on small pockets of the U.S. at the state level and allows the states to serve as policy laboratories, which eases the pressure on the federal government to be the singular social service provider. However, I also think part of it has to do with the proliferation of prosperity theology among Pentecostalism, an outlook which seems to have far more cultural cash in the US than in Europe. Conservative party platforms in Europe often explicitly cite their desire to preserve and improve their national health systems as a source of national pride. In the US, the attitude that poverty is deserved seems to be more prevalent among conservatives than in Europe, though I don't have a citation to back up that sense directly. While Christian Democrats or other conservatives in Europe tend to offer justifications for their policy preferences that are not dissimilar to US conservatives, more market competition, greater choice, etc., there is also an undercurrent of general agreement in Europe that providing access to poverty alleviation programs is both praiseworthy and necessary. This attitude is more directly reflective of classical Catholic and Protestant attitudes outlined by David Miller, which take a dim view of wealth in the context of faith and insist that wealth is not a sign of God's favor. The combination of our differing political system and, given that the institutionalization of different attitudes on wealth among religious people, religion being correlated with a propensity for conservative political attitudes, seems to have at least some impact on why social programs and healthcare for the poor are so much more controversial in the US than in the rest of the developed world. However, I'm not an expert, so I'm sure there are cultural/historical factors I missed. In the US, the attitude that poverty is deserved seems to be more prevalent among conservatives than in Europe, though I don't have a citation to back up that sense directly. The long history of individualism in the US definitely explains some of the "they deserve it" attitudes. However, it's also important to add that for many religious conservatives, their ideology very much encourages and supports church-based social programs. They just hate the idea of the government making it essentially involuntary and controlling who gets what and where. In other words, their spheres of social concern are very community-oriented. I've got no real sources ATM, so I'll understand if this gets deleted. I certainly will check out the source you provided since I am struggling to understand this presently, but in my experiences of talking with Pentecostals around where I live, plenty of them in this area, the argument I almost universally get is that caring for the poor is the church's job, not the government's. They view social programs as teaching people to depend on government instead of God, another very common response I get. I don't have sources for that, so it will just have to stand as an anecdote. Should be easy enough to look into, however, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone has written about it. I also think it would be interesting to see some research comparing the attitudes on wealth that you mentioned to the general view of the role of the government and how they interact with each other. I'm sure there's a large racial element as well. As soon as you bring up any type of safety net program, welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, a lot of people have this image of Ronald Reagan's a welfare queen, a black person who can but won't work, does drugs, has kids and lives off the hard work of others. This stereotype is extremely powerful and lets people totally write off programs as unnecessary, when in reality it is designed to help people like them too. Does Ayn Rand's philosophy play a role in the American conservative psyche? I am not well informed of Ayn Rand's philosophy, but as far as I am aware, she believes altruism is not good. As a non-American observer, many American conservatives do seem to subscribe to Ayn Rand's philosophy by rejecting many government welfare that citizens of other developed countries have no problem paying taxes for. Just like anything regarding human affairs, there probably are way too many factors, cultural, racial, political, involved for us to be able to take all of them into account. Having said that, if the findings of Haney Lopez in Dog Whistle Politics are correct, one of the major aspects of this problem arises from the tacit racism of the Republican Party and how they have been trying to galvanize their constituency via using thinly veiled racism. This is known as the Southern Strategy because it has allowed the Republican Party to sweep the Southern states in the last 40 years. The rundown of the Southern Strategy goes like this: since the blacks are the ones using welfare programs and government benefits the most, cutting these programs or not expanding them will hurt them the most. Lee Atwater, the campaign manager of Ronald Reagan, is on tape admitting to the Southern Strategy, and interestingly enough the usage of this strategy was finally admitted by Michael Steele, the chairman of Republican Committee, in 2010. Also, if you don't have the time to read Haney Lopez's book and just want a quick rundown of it, you can check out this interview of his.